I want you to take a second and really put yourself back in the most stressful academic moment of your life. You are probably picturing a very specific scene right now.
Oh, yeah. The classic testing nightmare.
Right, you know the one. You're sitting at a rigid desk. You are completely alone. The room is dead silent except for, the ticking of a clock on the wall and the scratching of pencils around you.
Just you and the paper.
Exactly. You're staring down at a terrifyingly difficult exam, and you suddenly realize you only actually know the answer to, well, maybe half the questions. The panic starts to set in. Your heart rate spikes. It is just you versus the test, and there is absolutely no lifeline.
It's a nearly universal experience, that feeling of complete, unadulterated isolation under pressure. I mean, traditional testing is fundamentally designed as a solitary act, isolating you to measure exactly what is inside your head and nothing else.
Right, it's like an intellectual quarantine.
Yeah.
But for this deep dive, we're looking at a radical blueprint from an educational handbook that completely dismantles that solitary nightmare.
It really does.
It takes that high-anxiety, high-stakes test and engineers it into a collaborative 3-stage event called the pyramid exam.
And this isn't just some minor tweak to how a classroom operates, like, moving desks into a circle. The source material we are examining today outlines a massive structural overhaul of how assessment works.
Yeah, that's intense.
The creators of this cooperative learning activity give it a very specific rating. They warn up front that the implementation is involved, giving it 3 out of 3 stars for complexity.
Yeah, they do not sugarcoat it at all. But then, get this, they rate the overall value of the activity as beyond significant, a full 5 out of 5 stars.
Which is huge.
It is. They explicitly state that while it's the absolute most complicated instructional activity they offer, students consistently rate it as the most valuable thing they do all year, by far. So our mission today is to figure out exactly how this intricate, multi-stage format operates. We want to understand the psychology behind it and answer the big question: why in the world would any student ever rate a brutally difficult, complex exam as their favorite experience of the year?
Because you and I both know that is certainly not the standard reaction to a difficult test. To understand why it works, we have to look at how the architects build the foundation of this pyramid.
Wow.
It all starts with setting a baseline of individual struggle.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get to the wild, highly collaborative parts of the pyramid exam, the baseline rules have to be established. And the entire engine of this exam runs on a point decay system.
Right, the decaying points.
Yeah, the test is administered in 3 distinct phases, and the possible points you can earn for a single correct question decrease dramatically with each phase.
What's fascinating here is the mechanical structure. It plays heavily on human psychology. Phase 1 is the individual phase, where a correct answer is worth a full 10 points. Phase 2 is the team phase, where the value drops to 6 points. And phase 3 is the class phase, where a correct answer is only worth 2 points.
It leverages loss aversion, right? It reminds me of a high-stakes game show where the prize pool shrinks the longer you take to lock in your final answer. If you know the answer immediately on your own, you get the maximum reward.
That's a perfect comparison.
But let's put ourselves in the shoes of a student starting that first phase, the solo ascent. According to the blueprint, this first phase operates basically like a regular exam, but with a few very strange modifications. For starters, the teacher allows the students to bring in an 8.5 by 11 cheat sheet,
which immediately changes the fundamental dynamic of the test. By allowing a cheat sheet, you are shifting the cognitive load from pure rote memorization to high-level application.
because you don't have to memorize every single date.
Exactly. You can bring your formulas, your dates, your vocabulary words, but if you don't know how to synthesize and apply those tools to complex problems, the paper won't save you.
But then the logistics get weird.
Yeah.
The instructions dictate that while taking this solo phase, the student has to fill in 2 separate scantrons.
2 of them, yeah.
One has their name on it, just like normal, but the other one is an anonymous duplicate. They literally bubble in both sheets identically and turn them both in. Wait, forcing stressed-out students to juggle 2 scantrons sounds like a recipe for administrative chaos. Why create a redundant anonymous duplicate?
Well, the anonymous scantron is actually a brilliant mechanical setup for the phase that comes next. By having an anonymous duplicate, the teacher is preserving the absolute privacy of your individual performance. If you bomb the test, no one knows. But simultaneously, they are creating a pool of raw, unbiased data that the entire class is going to analyze later. It separates the ego from the information. If you see a test with a classmate's name on it, you judge the person. If it's anonymous, you just look for patterns.
You're just looking at the math of what people guessed.
Okay.
That's clever. But here's the part that really caught my eye. The architects of this exam instruct the teacher to designate another classroom, or what they specifically call a deep thought hallway, for students who need more time. Strictly no cell phones or computers allowed out there.
Which is a deeply empathetic mechanism if you think about standard test anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. Think about being in a standard exam. The absolute worst feeling in the world is being one of the last 3 people still working.
It is agonizing.
The room gets restless. The rest of the class is sighing, packing up their backpacks, and you could just feel them staring at the back of your head, willing you to finish. The pressure is immense. You end up just blindly guessing on the last 10 questions just to make the staring stop.
Right. Precisely. The deep thought hallway physically removes the student from that pressure cooker. The teacher actively encourages students to use it, signaling that needing more time isn't a failure, it's just a different cognitive processing speed.
That's a great way to reframe it.
It lets the main room move forward without completely abandoning the students who are still meticulously working through the 10-point phase.
So the individual phase wraps up. It was designed to be incredibly tough. They used their cheat sheets, they bubbled their double scantrons, some utilized the hallway to escape the panic. The blueprint notes that this first phase is intentionally engineered to leave students doubting themselves.
Highly intentional.
And that deliberate engineered struggle is the exact trigger for phase 2.
Because the isolation has served its purpose. They have hit a wall, and now they are desperate for a lifeline. Survival mode kicks in.
So you have a room full of students who have just had their confidence shattered. How does the handbook recommend rescuing them from that panic? This brings us to phase 2, the team phase. Remember the point decay system. A correct answer has now dropped from 10 points down to 6.
Right.
The students immediately form small groups, and they are given only one single scantron bearing all of their names.
They are completely tethered to one another at this point. No one can go rogue and just guess on their own. You rise or fall purely on the consensus of the group.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To reach that consensus, the mechanics turn into a heist movie. The teams are allowed to send out a scout.
A scout. I love that term.
Imagine you are the scout in this scenario. You leave your team huddle and walk up to a central table where the teacher has displayed all of those anonymous duplicate scantrons from phase 1. You are doing reconnaissance on the intel gathered by the rest of the class.
It's an incredible shift. It transforms the passive act of test-taking into an active, high-stakes investigation. The scout isn't just trying to remember what they studied. They are tasked with rapidly analyzing peer data under pressure.
Yeah.
They are looking at question 14 and seeing that half the room guessed C and half the room guessed D. They have to take that intelligence back to their team to debate it.
Meanwhile, while the scouts are doing reconnaissance and the teams are agonizing over these 6-point questions, the teacher is in a dead sprint. The creators explicitly tell the teacher they need to race to wherever you need to go to get the scantron scored.
Literally racing the clock.
Whether grading by hand with an assistant or using a machine, they are frantically processing the results of phase 1 while phase 2 is still happening.
Because the timing of the information reveal is critical to the psychology of the room. Once that first round is graded, the teacher marches back in and posts the class average for phase 1 right on the board for everyone to see.
And the creators say it is imperative that the students know these questions are brutally hard. Let's say the teacher posts the score, and it's a 61%. The teacher is supposed to look at the room, tell them that the score above 60% is pretty darn good, and actively encourage the class to applaud. Which, wait, I have to pause here.
Go for it.
If you're listening to this and thinking a 60% average sounds like a complete failure, you aren't alone. In any normal grading scale, a 60% is a D-. Asking students to clap for a D- feels bizarre. Doesn't that just lower the bar and coddle them?
This raises an important question, right? It sounds totally counterintuitive, but it's actually about reframing how we define success in the face of a monumental challenge. By explicitly asking the class to applaud a 60%, the teacher is actively normalizing the struggle. If you give someone an impossible puzzle and they solve half of it on their first try alone, that isn't a failure, that's a solid foundation. The applause signals that this test isn't about basic compliance or easy memorization. It tells the students, hey, you just faced a mountain, and getting halfway up without a rope is an incredible feat.
I see. So instead of sitting there feeling stupid because they missed almost half the questions, they feel validated. The test is just objectively hard, and everyone is in the same boat.
Exactly. It prevents them from shutting down emotionally so they can actually focus on the team phase. And while the teams are working, the teacher transitions into a completely different role. They walk around and subtly guide struggling groups.
Dropping hints?
Yeah, they might lean over a desk and say, you might want to look a little closer at the formula you're using for number 4.
Which, again, feels almost like cheating in a traditional context. The teacher is giving hints during the exam.
But in the context of cooperative learning, this is what educators call active, real-time formative assessment.
Formative assessment, meaning assessing and adjusting during the learning process, rather than just waiting until the end to hand out a grade.
Precisely. The teacher isn't handing them the answer. They are redirecting the group's analytical energy to where it's needed most so they don't waste 10 minutes going down a blind alley. And for the teams that do figure it out and finish early, the teacher simply provides popular science magazines to keep them occupied.
Keep the fast kids engaged so they don't distract the team still in the trenches.
Yeah.
It's smart crowd control. But even with a scout and a team brain trust and subtle hints from the teacher, there are always going to be questions that are so intensely difficult, no team can crack them.
Oh, absolutely.
The handbook anticipates this dead end, which forces the exam to evolve one last time.
It moves from isolated individuals to small survival teams and finally to a unified whole-class town hall.
Phase 3, the class phase. The points have now decayed all the way down to a mere 2 points per correct answer. The teacher stands at the board and tallies the team scantrons. Whatever the majority of the teams picked becomes the official class answer.
But before the teacher confirms if the majority is right or wrong, they pause and ask the class to present their arguments.
Right. The teacher steps back from being an evaluator and becomes a pure moderator. The explicit goal here is to facilitate a spirited and respectful debate among the factions in the room.
And the handbook points out a really beautiful detail here. The teacher uses this debate phase to specifically lend a voice to quiet students who they know have the correct answer.
Oh, because they just graded the solo tests.
Exactly. Because the teacher just graded the individual scantrons, they know exactly which introverted kid got question 18 right when their loud, extroverted teammates got it wrong. The teacher can draw them out and make sure their logic gets heard by the whole room.
That is brilliant.
It is incredibly empowering for those students. It proves in real time that being the loudest or most confident in a group does not make you the most correct.
But I'm still stuck on the fairness aspect of this majority rule. A majority vote on an academic exam. What if the loudest students convince the whole class to pick the completely wrong answer?
It's a valid concern.
Like if I studied all night, and I know for a fact the answer is B, but the charismatic kid bullies everyone into voting for C, my grade takes a hit because of someone else's ego. How does the handbook justify that?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at what the ultimate goal of the exercise is. The actual correct answer bubbled on the scantron at this stage is worth a minuscule 2 points. It's practically negligible.
Okay, true.
What is vastly more important is the process of getting there. The debate itself is the actual learning process.
So I'm sacrificing 2 points for the sake of the class's enlightenment.
In a way, yes, but think about the psychological impact. If the class confidently votes for the wrong answer, and the moment the teacher reveals the truth, the room erupts. That collective shock, like, wait, we all fiercely defended C, but it's actually B, that creates massive cognitive dissonance.
The mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. They were so sure they were right, and the sudden realization they are wrong leaves a mark.
Exactly. That sting of being collectively wrong cements the correct concept in their brains far more effectively than if they had just passively read the right answer in a textbook. You never forget the question the whole class got tricked on.
Wow, yeah.
And because time is a finite resource, the teacher doesn't waste the debate phase congratulating the class on the easy questions everyone got right. They zero in purely on the edges of their understanding, the highly contested questions.
Okay, but what if a student's sitting there, the debate is over, and they realize they absolutely bombed the 10-point individual phase? Is there any recourse, or is their grade just tanked?
There is a recourse.
Right, the creators outline a final, vital mechanism to handle this, called explanation sheets. Before anyone leaves the room, a student can appeal the answers they missed on their individual solo phase to try and win back partial or even full credit. But there's a massive, rigorous catch.
Yes, and this might actually be the most intellectually demanding part of the entire framework. To appeal, the student cannot just say, oh, I meant to pick D.
No easy outs.
Right. They must explicitly indicate the wrong answer they originally chose, and then write out a detailed explanation of their own flawed logic for why they thought it was correct at the time.
For those of us who aren't educators, this is essentially metacognition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about how you think. Instead of just memorizing the right answer now, you're performing an autopsy on your own bad logic.
Metacognition in its purest form. It is infinitely easier to just guess a correct answer than it is to forensically dissect your own misunderstanding. Imagine a student wrote that the answer was A because they applied the wrong historical timeline. By forcing them to trace the exact steps of that flawed timeline on paper, the teacher ensures the student has fundamentally dismantled and rebuilt their internal mental model. You don't just fix the symptom, you fix the underlying thought process.
Okay, looking at all these pieces together, the loss aversion point decay, the heist mechanics of the scout, the cognitive dissonance of the debate, the metacognition of the appeals. It sounds like an absolute pedagogical dream. But practically speaking, how does this fit into a school day? To make this function within the strict, bell-ringing confines of a standard schedule, the logistical architecture has to be flawless.
It is a highly orchestrated event. The creators are very clear that time dictates everything. The number of questions on the exam is the critical variable, and it is governed entirely by the clock.
Right. They break the math down clearly. If you have a long 110-minute block class, you can safely run a 25-question pyramid exam. If there's a 75-minute class, 15 questions is the sweet spot. And if you are constrained to a standard 50-minute period,
Which a lot of schools are.
exactly, then you have to strip it all the way down to just 10 questions. Though they do note the absolute ideal scenario is running a 25-question exam over a relaxed 150-minute lab period. That's when this format truly has the space to work.
Because the one thing you cannot rush is the human element. You cannot rush the team consensus, and you certainly cannot rush a spirited debate. If the students feel the clock breathing down their necks during the collaborative phases, the rich discussion immediately collapses back into panicked guessing.
And because this format is so wildly jarring compared to everything students are used to, the architects heavily recommend running a practice round before the real exam date. They call it a pyramid practice exam, or a RAT.
A readiness assurance test.
Their RAA. The practice run allows the students to figure out the weird mechanics, the scouts, and the double scantrons without tanking their actual midterms. But it also serves a crucial psychological diagnostic purpose. The handbook states that the target individual average for a R8 is brutally low, between 40% and 50%. And the text explicitly says that if students' heads are drooped upon leaving a RAT, then it is, quote, mission accomplished. So what does this all mean? I read that and thought, what kind of sadistic teacher wants their students leaving the room with drooping heads?
It sounds harsh, but it is the necessary destruction of hubris. Think about how students typically prepare for a test. They skim their notes, memorize a few flashcards, and assume they can skate by. The RT is a diagnostic shock to the system.
And reality check.
It proves to the students, definitively and mathematically, that their individual surface-level effort alone isn't going to be enough to survive the actual exam.
It shatters their complacency. They realize exactly how deep the water is, so they know exactly how hard they need to study for the real thing.
Precisely. It forces them to realize they need their team. And the handbook notes that after they put in the hard work post-R, the target individual average for the real high-stakes exam bumps up slightly to around 55%. And because they've been through the ringer of the practice run, they will actually be cheering when they see that 55%.
Because they finally understand the scale of the mountain. And the teacher reinforces that their solo effort, while important, does not stand alone. The score that actually matters, the number that goes into the permanent gradebook, is the composite score.
The sum of the parts. You take the individual 10-point phase, add the team's 6-point phase, and add the class 2-point phase. When all three are combined, the overall class average magically tends to land at a very healthy, very normal 75%.
But the journey to that 75% is entirely different. It wasn't earned through isolated recall in the silent room. It was earned through rigorous debate, peer instruction, reconnaissance, and deep critical analysis.
It fundamentally transitions the environment of the room. They are no longer isolated individuals competing against each other on a bell curve to see who is the smartest. They have been forged into a unified team fighting against the test itself.
Which brings us full circle to the core question we started with. Why is this incredibly complicated, grueling format consistently rated by students as the most valuable activity of the entire year? The blueprint boils it down to three distinct reasons. First, because it's directly tied to their grade. There's real skin in the game. It's not just a low-stakes theoretical icebreaker.
Second, it is a genuine, undeniable learning experience. The mechanics force engagement. You simply cannot walk out of that room without knowing more than when you walked in. You've defended your wrong answers, debated your peers, and confronted your own logic.
And third, it introduces a community-based sports element. Everyone is working together, utilizing scouts and strategy toward the shared goal of winning against the exam. It takes the intellectual rigor of academia and marries it to the emotional investment and camaraderie of a team sport.
It really is a masterful piece of instructional design. It proved that rigor and collaboration do not have to be mutually exclusive.
It takes that solitary nightmare of a silent classroom and turns it into the Super Bowl of learning.